Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time of shadows and whispers, a world where suspicion carried more weight than evidence and survival could depend on how loudly your neighbors prayed. The wind outside rattles the shutters of a small thatched cottage, and within its walls you crouch by a smoky fire, heart pounding, not because of wolves or war, but because someone mentioned your name in hushed tones at the market. In this world, an odd look or an herb garden might be enough to end your life. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing barefoot in the muddy streets of a village that barely has a name. The air is damp, thick with the scent of peat smoke and damp wool. And even in daylight, it feels like dusk here. Overcast skies forever muted, like the sun is embarrassed to show its face. You live in a place that exists more by habit than by any clear plan. People are born here, grow old, and die within a radius of a few miles, rarely leaving, rarely changing. And beneath the stillness is a humming current of fear of disease, of storms, of the harvest failing, and of you. Or what people think you might be. You're a woman in your mid-40s. That already puts you under quiet scrutiny. You've outlived 2 husbands, one lost to fever, the other to war. You have no children. That's odd. Suspicious even. You live alone near the edge of the woods where the trees whisper and the moss grows thick and soft beneath your steps. You gather plants, rosemary, mugwort, comfrey, and you know how to use them. People come to you with ailments and you help them. Quietly, of course. It wouldn't do to be seen as knowledgeable. The church bells ring every morning and every evening, and you cross yourself when you hear them, but you're not often at Mass. It's a long walk into the village and your knees don't always cooperate. But people notice. They always notice. The whispers began last winter, when the mayor's daughter took ill with a wasting sickness. You gave her a tincture of elderberry and licorice root, and for a time it helped. Then she died anyway. It wasn't your fault, you know that. But grief doesn't need reason. It needs a scapegoat. Since then you felt it in the way people cross themselves a little faster when you pass. In the way children don't run up to you anymore. In how the baker who once greeted you warmly now keeps his eyes on the floor. The priest avoids speaking to you directly. And yesterday, 2 men from the council knocked on your door. They were polite, too polite. They asked questions. Have you had visitors lately? Do you know the midwife who came from the next village over? Were you present at the birth of the blacksmith's son? Harmless questions, really. But you know what they're doing. They're building a story. They're gathering pieces for a tale that doesn't need to be true, just convincing. And there is no shortage of people willing to believe. In the medieval world, witchcraft is not a possibility, it's a certainty. The only question is who the devil has touched and when. You lie awake most nights now, ears tuned to every twig snap outside. You hide your mortar and pestle in the chimney flue and burn your dried herbs in the fire. But it won't matter. Once the suspicion catches, it spreads like dry hay in flame. This morning they returned not the councilman this time, but a group of 4 men and a woman with sharp eyes and arms folded tight. They bring you to the church. You don't resist, of course. Resisting would only confirm what they already think they know. They question you in front of the altar, beneath the crucifix where Christ gazes down with unreadable mercy. The questions come like hailstones. Have you ever cursed a child? Have you dreamed of a man with goat's legs? Have you ever ridden a broom in the night? You blink, you try to answer plainly to keep your voice calm, but your mouth is dry and your legs are trembling. They ask about your cats. You have two. They ask their names. You say them Willow and Thomas. They exchange glances. Naming a familiar, suspicious. They ask if you've ever been seen with a toad. You think they might be joking. You almost laugh. But the room is very quiet. You're allowed to go home for now. But they assign you a watcher, a pious boy of 13 who sits outside your cottage and records when you leave, when you eat, when you speak. You don't know his name and he doesn't speak to you. He just watches. At night, you light no candles. You sit in the dark, remembering the old songs your mother taught you. Songs from before the village, before the fear. You don't sing them aloud. That would be foolish. You hear the stories, of course. You always have. A woman accused in another village shaved bald and dragged through the streets. A man claimed his cow stopped giving milk because a neighbor gave him the evil eye. A girl drowned in a pond, and her stepmother was blamed because she smiled too brightly the day before. It's not about magic. It never is. It's about control, about making sense of things that don't make sense. If the plague comes, it must be someone's fault. If crops fail, someone must be punished. It's easier to blame than to accept chaos. And someone like you, a woman alone old enough to be strange and young enough to survive, is the perfect vessel for their fear. You start to notice your own thoughts turning against you. Perhaps you did say something unkind to the mayor's daughter. Perhaps you did feel resentment. Perhaps that moment of anger that whispered wish that she would stop whining. Perhaps that was enough. Guilt grows even where there is no cause. A fortnight passes, then comes the knock in the night. Not the gentle knock of a neighbor, but the hard, quick rap of someone with purpose. You open the door and see two men in robes, not priests, not officials, but something older. A witch finder and his assistant. They don't ask permission to enter. They just do. Your cottage is small, but they search it thoroughly. They find nothing, of course. You made sure of that. Still, they examine your hands. They look for the devil's mark, a mole, a blemish, a freckle. You have many. One on your shoulder blade makes them pause. They call it suspicious. They take you away that night. You don't cry, you've cried all you can. They bring you to a stone cell beneath the church. It smells of wet earth and despair. A single straw mat and a bucket are all you have. No blanket, no food until morning. You curl up and close your eyes, but sleep doesn't come. Your name has been spoken. The nightmare has begun, and it will not end until someone breaks or burns. The stone beneath your body is unforgiving, and your limbs ache from the chill and the damp. It's hard to tell if the tremors running through your muscles are from the cold or from the dread that's settled into your bones. Above you, the walls of the church muffle the faint sounds of early morning, murmured prayers, the scrape of boots, the first bell of the day. The village is waking up. You are not part of it anymore. Hours pass, or maybe it's days. The light that filters in from a narrow slit high in the wall doesn't change much. Gray, always never bright. Food arrives in the form of thin broth and crusts of black bread brought by a novice who doesn't meet your eyes. You eat slowly, as if chewing through mud. You know you'll need strength. Eventually, the witchfinder returns. His name is never spoken, but his presence carries the weight of dozens of confessions. His assistant walks a few paces behind, always quiet, always watching. The witchfinder has the voice of a man who enjoys being obeyed. He tells you calmly that your cooperation will make things easier. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't need to. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. You're brought to a larger chamber with high ceilings and a long table. There are no instruments here, no ropes, no fire, no iron yet, but you know they exist somewhere nearby. You're told to sit. You do. The questions begin again. They ask about dreams. Do you dream of flying? Do you remember dancing in the woods? Are there names you mutter in your sleep? You shake your head. You tell them you sleep very little, that your dreams, when they come, are mundane, baking, walking, planting. He nods as if that in itself is revealing. They ask about your mother. You feel a twist in your gut. She died when you were young, but she taught you the old ways, how to make a poultice for a fever, how to chew willow bark for pain. The church never liked those remedies, though they worked. To them, any knowledge not blessed by clergy is suspect. You mention her name and the witchfinder tilts his head. He repeats it slowly, like a curse. He says she was whispered about in her time, that he's heard her name before. Your blood goes cold. They call it guilt by legacy. They call it the inheritance of sin. You try to stay calm, to answer plainly. You speak carefully, never too quickly, never with emotion. But your voice cracks when they bring up the girl who died, the mayor's daughter. They claim her spirit has not rested. They say the priest saw her ghost in a dream pointing toward your cottage. You know it's absurd, but they say it with such certainty that you almost start to believe it. They send you back to the cell. This time they let you bring a blanket, a luxury, or a test. You wrap yourself tightly, the wool coarse against your skin. You try to remember things that make sense, the rhythm of kneading bread, the smell of rosemary when it's crushed in your palm, the way frost looks when it settles softly on the grass just before sunrise. But your thoughts wander back to the girl's face, to her feverish skin, to the way her breath rattled in her chest. You tried to help. You always did. Outside your cell, you hear footsteps. Not just once, but often. Guards, priests, or others like you. It's hard to know. You begin to realize that this isn't a trial. It's a process. And like most processes, it needs no proof, only momentum. The following day, or what you think is the following day, the assistant comes alone. He's young, maybe 20, and his eyes are sunken from too many late nights. He doesn't speak until you do. You ask for water. He nods and brings it carefully, as if expecting you to throw it at him. You don't. He lingers. Then finally he asks, "Why do they say you're a witch?" The question is so simple, so childlike in its sincerity, that you almost laugh. But your voice is a whisper when you reply, "Because someone had to be." He studies you. You wonder if he's lost someone too. A sister, a mother, a friend. Maybe he wants to believe in evil. Maybe that's easier than believing in randomness. You're given ink and paper that evening. Another test. They ask you to write down everything you've ever seen or heard about witches. Not what you've done, what you've witnessed. You're told this isn't a confession. It's for the record. You write slowly. Your hands shake. You describe things you've heard in markets and fairs and tales told by traveling merchants. A woman who made storms with her voice, a man who could speak to wolves, a girl who walked through fire unharmed. Folklore, really. Fantasies. But you write them as though you believe them. You feel sick doing it. They take your pages and do not return. When the witch finder visits again, he brings another document, your own words, copied and marked. He points to passages and asks if you've seen these things firsthand. You shake your head. He asks why you wrote them. You say you thought he wanted stories. He says he wants truth. Then comes the moment you've feared. They take you not to the cell, not to the table, but to a narrow room with stone walls darkened by soot and water. A brazier burns in the corner. Iron tools hang neatly on the wall. You try not to show fear. It doesn't matter. They don't begin with violence. They begin with silence. You're left alone, seated on a bench, staring at the tools. A pulley in the ceiling. Thumb screws. A heavy wooden frame with ropes and gears. The silence stretches until it becomes unbearable. You almost welcome the sound of footsteps. When they return, they bind your hands. Not tightly yet. The witch finder says there are two ways forward: confession or denial. Denial prolongs pain. Confession ends it quickly. You don't reply. They test your body for the mark again. They scrape your skin and watch for blood. A spot behind your knee bleeds less than they expect. They call it the devil's teat. You bite your lip so hard it tastes of copper. That night, they let you return to the cell, but the implication is clear. This was only a beginning. You start to notice the strangeness of time. Your thoughts stretch like melted wax. Days blend. You try to mark them by meals, but they are irregular. Some mornings bring porridge, some nothing. You talk to yourself now quietly, softly, to remember your voice. The assistant comes again. He doesn't speak this time. He leaves bread and stands there watching. You ask him if anyone has stood up for you. He hesitates, then says, "Your neighbor, the old man with the limp, he said you once healed his dog." You feel warmth, then fear. You hope they don't punish him for it. One morning you wake with the realization that you've forgotten the names of flowers. You can see their shapes in your mind, soft petals, curling leaves, but the words escape you. That frightens you more than the pain did. The witchfinder returns. He tells you a confession has come in. A woman, a young one, says you taught her to curse a rival. You've never seen this woman. But he reads her testimony like scripture. Every word sounds polished, rehearsed. It doesn't matter. They believe her, or say they do. Your trial is scheduled. You're told it will be public. You're told it will be fair. You know better. The word trial suggests fairness, a chance to speak, a moment to explain. But in this place, in this time, the trial is not about truth. It is about form, ceremony, the illusion of righteousness wrapped in the authority of robes and scripture. You understand this now, even before the bells ring. They bring you from your cell at dawn. Your legs are stiff and your joints ache, but you walk, slowly, deliberately. There are people gathered already, villagers, council members, children clutching their mothers' skirts, and even strangers who must have traveled to witness the spectacle. Everyone loves a villain, especially when that villain is a woman who once lived on the edge of the wood and knew how to make headaches vanish. You are led through the nave of the church. You've passed through these arches before in better days, during feast days or baptisms, but now they feel unfamiliar, foreign. The air is heavy with incense and judgment. The altar is no longer a place of salvation. It's a stage. The presiding magistrate is a man from another town, supposedly impartial, supposedly wise. He has cold eyes and a trimmed beard, and his fingers are stained with ink. He does not look at you as a person. You are already a case to him, a problem to resolve. They begin with prayers invoking divine guidance. The villagers murmur along, but their eyes keep drifting back to you. You sit on a bench, hands bound lightly in your lap, and you do not look at them. You look at the beams above, at the cobwebs swaying softly, and you try to pretend you're somewhere else. Witnesses are called. First, the mayor, still hollow-eyed from grief, speaks of his daughter's illness. He doesn't accuse you outright, but he doesn't have to. He speaks of how she felt better after your tincture, and then worse. The implication hangs in the air like smoke. The audience nods. The next witness is a farmer's wife. She claims her cow stopped producing milk after you passed by her gate and muttered something under your breath. You try to remember the moment. Perhaps you were tired. Perhaps you were thinking of something else. Or perhaps it never happened. It doesn't matter now. They bring in the young woman who accused you of teaching her spells. She is pale and trembling, no older than 16. Her eyes avoid yours. She speaks softly of gatherings in the woods, of whispered invocations of talismans. You want to scream that it's a lie, but you don't. You keep your mouth closed. Dignity is all you have left. A few people come to your defense. The old man with the limp, his voice shaking, tells the court you once mended his leg when no one else would. A mother says you helped bring her baby into the world safely, but their words carry less weight. Good deeds are remembered briefly. Accusations echo longer. Then it's your turn. You're brought to the center of the chamber and asked to respond. Your voice is hoarse but steady. You say you have never harmed anyone, never conjured, never invoked spirits. You speak of herbs and healing, of superstition and misunderstanding. The magistrate listens, nods once, and asks if you can recite the Lord's Prayer. You begin, "Our Father who art in heaven." The room leans in. "Hallowed be thy name." A few heads tilt. "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." Your voice falters. You skip a line. You know the words. Of course you do. But in this moment, with so many eyes on you, your mouth goes dry. You stammer. You repeat yourself. A low murmur spreads across the pews. The magistrate raises a hand. You fall silent. They confer behind the altar. You can't hear them. You stare ahead at the stained glass window, at the image of Saint Michael defeating the devil. You wonder what it feels like to be protected. The verdict is not read immediately. There is another ritual, a final examination, the last test. You are taken to the village square the next day, not to be punished yet, but to be judged by the elements. They say water cannot lie. If you are innocent, the water will accept you. If guilty, it will reject you. They call it the trial by ordeal. You stand at the edge of the mill pond. A crowd surrounds you. The same faces from the church, only now they are under the open sky, the smell of damp earth and reeds rising around you. You're stripped to your shift arms, bound. Ropes are tied around your waist to pull you back in if necessary. They lower you into the water. It is cold. So cold your breath vanishes. You do not scream. You sink. For a moment, the world is quiet. Just the muffled sound of bubbles of moving silt of your own heartbeat. Then they pull you up. Gasps, cries. You floated. That is all they need. The logic is cruel. The innocent sink because water, a pure element, accepts them. The guilty float because the water, knowing their sin, refuses them. You floated, therefore guilty. They wrap you in a rough wool cloak. You're shivering violently now, not just from the cold. The magistrate announces the findings formally. The people nod satisfied. Some look away. A few children whisper behind their hands. You are taken back to the cell. The verdict is pronounced guilty of witchcraft and consorting with the devil. The punishment is not declared aloud. Everyone already knows it. Burning. Not immediately. There are more days. Paperwork, approvals, process. But it will happen. You lie on the stone floor and trace cracks with your finger. You think of rain falling on your garden. You think of birdsong. You think of silence. You begin to plan your death, not in fear, but in detail. You think about what you will wear, what you will say, whether you will scream, whether you will sing. You remember an old lullaby and hum it softly. The assistant returns one more time. He says nothing. He kneels beside you and places something in your hand. A sprig of lavender, dried, brittle, but still fragrant. You close your fingers around it and nod. He says, "I'm sorry," and leaves. You are alone again. And the pyre waits. The days stretch long now, suspended between your sentence and its fulfillment. There is no more questioning, no more visitors. The trial has passed, the judgment made, and the air around you feels thick with finality. Outside your cell, the village resumes its rhythms. Children still play. Bread is still baked. But you are no longer a part of that world. You've become a story told around the hearth. At night, you dream not of fire but of water. Cool, silent water surrounding you, lifting you gently, bearing your weight like a forgotten promise. In your dream, no one watches. No one pulls you back up. You float forever in peace, the murmur of the pond, like a lullaby. In waking hours, your mind begins to drift. The edges of your memory blur. You try to remember names, the name of the blacksmith's first son, the old miller's wife, the midwife who passed through 2 summers ago. Sometimes they come to you, sometimes not. You fear that you are slipping away before the fire ever reaches you. Then one afternoon, the witchfinder appears again, not in the dark confines of your cell or the questioning room, but in the corridor backlit by the gray light filtering through the high windows. He does not enter. He simply watches. You meet his eyes. He looks tired. Not remorseful, not kind, but worn. As though the machinery of this ritual grinds him down too, even as he turns its wheels. He says nothing. And then he is gone. Later, a priest visits you. Not the local one, he never had the courage, but a younger man sent from a nearby monastery. He sits on the stone bench and folds his hands in his lap. He introduces himself gently as Father Adalric and offers you confession. You consider this. The old fear of heresy makes you hesitate. But you are past fear now, past guilt. You tell him everything about your mother's teachings, your herbs, your prayers that weren't in Latin. You tell him about the girl you tried to save, the herbs that should have worked. You speak in a quiet monotone, as though recounting a tale not your own. Father Adalric listens. He doesn't interrupt. When you fall silent, he asks no questions. He only says, "The Lord sees the heart." Not only the words. It is the kindest thing anyone has said to you in weeks. He returns again the next morning, brings you a bowl of warm milk sweetened with honey. You sip it slowly, grateful. He reads psalms aloud. You listen with half-closed eyes, letting the rhythm of the words blur into something soft and far away. On the third day, he brings paper and ink. He suggests you write anything you wish, your story, your thoughts, a letter. He promises he will deliver it. You write a letter to no one in particular, perhaps to the wind, or to whatever eyes might one day stumble across it. You begin with your name. You haven't spoken it aloud in weeks. It looks strange on the page, the letters bending slightly under your trembling hand. You write about your home, the moss on the stones, the ivy along the eaves, the warmth of your little hearth when the sun set early in winter. You write about the village children who once gathered at your feet for stories, about the smiles that disappeared when the whispers began. You do not write about the fire. You do not give it space on the page. Father Adalric reads it silently. Then he folds it and places it in the sleeve of his robe. That evening, you're given clean garments, simple linen, but soft and free of the damp that soaked your skin for days. Your hair is combed, your hands washed. It feels like preparation for burial, not execution. The villagers gather before dawn the next day. You hear the bustle from your cell boots on cobblestone, hushed murmurs, a child crying, the creak of a cart being rolled into place. There is a rhythm to these things, as though the village has done it before. And it has. Not often, but enough. You are led out beneath a gray and cloud-heavy sky. The air smells of rain that hasn't yet arrived. A scaffold has been built in the clearing just beyond the churchyard. The pyre is already stacked. Fresh wood, bone dry. It will burn quickly. The crowd is silent as you pass. You glance sideways and see familiar faces, some you once helped, some who avoided your eyes for weeks. Now they stare openly as if to memorize your face before it vanishes. The assistant is there, standing near the edge of the square. He looks down when your gaze finds him. You climb the steps without stumbling. Your legs are surprisingly steady. At the top, 2 men tie your wrists loosely to the post. You almost don't notice. You're watching the sky now, faintly pink with morning. Somewhere far off, a bird sings. The priest stands nearby, reading softly from the Psalms. The words drift like smoke, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You mouth the words along with him. Then comes the torch. The witchfinder, cloaked and impassive, gives a single nod. The torchbearer hesitates. It's a moment stretched across time. You see the boy's hands shaking. He's young, maybe 14. You wonder if he'll dream of this night for the rest of his life. The torch touches the edge of the pile. Smoke rises first slow and white, then the flame. It catches eagerly. The wood hisses, crackles, roars. The heat reaches you faster than you expected. You close your eyes, and in your mind you are walking through the woods at dusk. The sun filters through the trees. You hear the soft hum of insects, the crunch of twigs underfoot, the rustle of leaves. You bend to pick a sprig of wild thyme, feel the brush of its texture between your fingers. No one is watching. No one is afraid. You are simply there, whole, and free. But you don't die, not yet. Not in the way they expect. The flames never quite touch your skin. You remember the heat, the roar, the suffocating smoke clawing its way up into your lungs, but then darkness. Not death. Not peace, just silence. And after that, a strange, flickering sort of memory. You awaken in a different cell, not of stone, but of wood. The light is softer here, filtered through slats. You're not tied, not gagged, and the scent in the air isn't smoke, but pine and damp straw. For a long moment, you think you've passed on, and this is some gentle afterplace for the falsely accused. But no, your body aches. Your limbs feel heavy, too solid for a spirit. You're alive. You were spared. You don't yet know why. Later, you will learn the fire was doused prematurely. The magistrate, newly uneasy, consulted with church authorities. A higher tribunal requested a pause, a delay. Word had spread of irregularities in your trial. A traveling monk, a noblewoman sympathetic to women healers, a handful of whispered doubts, small forces stirred somewhere beyond the village. Enough to pull you back from the brink. You are told none of this directly. You piece it together from the hushed conversations of the guards, from the curious glances of villagers, when you're led through the square, no longer bound, but still watched. You are not free. Not yet. But you are no longer on fire, and that alone feels miraculous. In your new confinement, the food is better. Your bedding clean. Father Adalric visits often now, always with news cloaked in riddles. He tells you softly that not everyone believes in fire. Some believe in trials of thought of reflection. A tribunal has been convened. A clerical inquiry. And for the moment, you are a subject of interest, not an enemy, not quite an accused. He tells you it might take months. You nod. You can wait. You spend your days alone mostly. They let you walk in a small garden behind the church, under supervision, of course. You kneel by the herb beds, touching the leaves, inhaling the faint, familiar scents, thyme, marjoram, sage. These were once tools, then contraband, and now perhaps a path to redemption. The boy who watches you does not speak, but he's not cruel. One day he hands you a tiny packet of seeds. His hand brushes yours, and you sense he isn't sure why he's helping. Only that it feels like the right thing to do, so you plant them, in the corner near the rosemary. You press the seeds into the earth and cover them gently, a small ritual just for you. At night you lie awake, the wind tapping gently against the shutters. You trace old memories like runes in your mind, faces of women. You helped children, you nursed animals, you healed. Each memory becomes a shield, a thin, glowing armor against the darkness of what's happened. You recall stories your mother once told you by candlelight, stories of women who turned into owls to escape their hunters, of girls who wept themselves into rivers, of saints who healed with the touch of a hand and were martyred for it anyway. You understand those stories now. They weren't tales of fantasy, they were preparation. You are summoned one morning to a different building, a hall used rarely for feasts or tax collections. Now it holds something far stranger, a delegation. Priests, scribes, men with parchment and long questioning eyes. They call it an inquiry, not a trial. You are seated before them, not tied, not restrained. They speak Latin among themselves, but address you in your own tongue. They are curious, not hostile. One asks about your knowledge of plants. You answer plainly. One asks why you lived alone. You explain your second husband died in the wars, and no one offered marriage after that. Your house was your mother's. It's quiet there. The forest is kind. Another asks if you ever meant to cause harm. You pause, and then you say, "Oh, but I was angry. Angry that the girl died, angry that no one helped her sooner, angry that grief is heavier than a fever. If that made you a witch, then perhaps everyone is one." There is a long silence. They dismiss you. No verdict is given. You return to your cell, though it doesn't feel like one anymore. It's become something else, a waiting room, a space between labels. Witch, woman, widow, healer, heretic, survivor. The weeks pass. The garden blooms. You are not told when the verdict arrives, but you know something has changed when the bishop himself visits. He is older than you imagined, with thin hands and sharp eyes. He smells of incense and parchment. He doesn't sit. He looks at you as though weighing your soul on a scale hidden behind his gaze. He says the tribunal found no clear evidence of pact or invocation, but your practices are dangerous, your teachings unregulated. You are not to be executed. But you will leave this place. You will go north to a convent. You will live under watch. You will not speak of spirits. You will not practice healing. You nod. You've learned how to nod without agreeing. You pack your few things, a shawl, a pair of shoes worn thin, a bundle of herbs you grew yourself. The lavender the assistant gave you is still intact, brittle but whole. You wrap it in cloth. You ride in a cart, not a cage. The road out of the village is quiet, lined with trees that have stood since before the village ever whispered the word witch. You don't look back. Not yet. There will be time for that later. You close your eyes. The cart creaks beneath you. A bird calls out in the trees. The forest does not remember your name, but it remembers your footsteps. And it waits. The convent appears as a pale smudge on the horizon long before you reach it. Its gray walls and sharp steeple rising like a tooth from the rolling hills. The sisters call it Saint Emilda's, but to the travelers you pass, it is known only as the Retreat, a place for widows' penitents and the inconveniently devout. It is neither sanctuary nor prison, but it smells faintly of both. You arrive in the late afternoon, your legs stiff from the ride, your fingers still curled around the bundle of herbs in your lap. A nun with soft eyes and firm hands meets you at the gate. She does not smile, but she doesn't look away either. She asks your name, not the one the villagers hissed with accusation, but the one your mother whispered into your hair when you were small. You give it. She leads you through a narrow courtyard, its flagstones lined with old moss. The walls here are close but not suffocating. You are shown to a small room, bare but clean, a cot, a basin, a window the size of your hand. The wind hums against the shutters in a voice not unlike the one outside your old cottage. You sleep deeply that first night. No dreams, no flames, just darkness and the smell of old linen. In the morning you are given a plain robe, a wooden comb, and instructions. You will rise before the sun. You will join the sisters for prayers, meals, and silence. Your tasks will vary. Gardening, cleaning, tending the sick. You are not required to take vows. Not yet. Perhaps never. The abbess says this slowly, watching your eyes for resistance. You give her none. There are others here like you, quiet women with careful steps and hollowed eyes. Some are truly nuns. Others are like you, placed here, not chosen. A former midwife, a widow accused of harboring spirits, a woman who once interpreted dreams too vividly for a merchant's liking. You learn their names slowly. You speak only when permitted, but you listen always. The days fall into rhythm. Bells mark your hours. You kneel in the chapel each morning, the cold stone pressing into your knees. You mouth the prayers, even the Latin ones, letting the syllables wash over you like a cleansing rain. You scrub floors. You carry pails of water from the well. You help in the infirmary wrapping wounds and boiling linens. The other women watch your hands closely at first, unsure if they should trust them. But wounds close, fevers break, and slowly they begin to nod instead of flinch. Your garden grows again. It begins with the herbs you manage to keep: lavender, rosemary, chamomile. Then, when the abbess sees your skill, you are granted a corner of the cloister garden. You dig into the soil with reverence. You whisper the old names of plants as you plant them, not as spells, but as memories. One day the abbess passes by while you are weeding. She does not stop, but she says without looking, "Your hands are steadier than your reputation." You take it as a compliment. The seasons change. You mark them by the shifts in birdsong and the color of the leaves outside your window. Winter arrives soft and gray. The nuns knit together in the evenings, their fingers looping yarn into patterns older than scripture. You join them clumsy at first, then competent. You knit quietly, eyes on your lap, and speak only if spoken to. Your reputation here becomes one of discipline, of solitude, a model of quiet reform. But inside you remain unchanged. You do not forget the flames. You do not forget the pond, or the church, or the whisper of your name in the mouths of frightened people. Sometimes late at night, you remember the child who accused you. You wonder what she thinks now, if she remembers your face, if she sleeps well. Sometimes you press your hand against the cold glass of your window and imagine your old home. Whether the ivy still climbs the walls, whether someone else lives there now. But you do not write. You do not ask. That chapter has closed. Spring returns, and with it change. A new novice arrives. She is young, barely 17, and full of questions no one wants to answer. Her name is Elise. She lingers near you during chores, watches you in the garden, asks about the uses of mint, the properties of comfrey. You answer in clipped sentences, at first. Then gradually, you begin to explain more. She listens with the hunger of someone who needs knowledge, not for curiosity, but for survival. One afternoon, she brings you a small bird with a broken wing. She found it near the chapel steps. You examine it gently, wrap it in cloth, place it in a basket near the hearth. You speak to it softly. Elise watches every movement. She says nothing, but the next day she brings you a sprig of valerian. No one notices. Or if they do, they say nothing. The bird recovers. You release it at dawn. Elise is there beside you, eyes wide. She does not clap, does not smile. She simply watches it fly away, her lips parted like she too might take flight. You think about warning her, about the danger of being seen, of standing out. But you don't. You know now that no warning can prepare someone. Not really. Instead, you tell her about the lavender sprigs your mother would dry on the rafters, about the way elderberries need to be boiled to lose their bitterness, about how mugwort thrives in disturbed soil. You teach quietly, as your mother did, in whispers, in gestures, in careful, slow phrases. It's not a rebellion. Not yet. But it is something else. Something dangerous. Something necessary. And as the herbs grow tall in the sun, and Elise's questions grow bolder, you begin to understand that your story did not end on the pyre. It only transformed, like roots in winter waiting. The convent walls, once confining, begin to feel porous. Life here follows its rhythms, bells for prayers, bells for meals, bells for sleep. But in between the tolls of bronze and duty, you find little moments that belong only to you. A warm patch of sun in the garden, a moment of silence before matins when the wind rustles the apple trees, the soft scrape of your knife slicing fresh yarrow for drying. These are your new spells. Quiet, unspoken ones. Elise is growing into herself. At first, she mimicked your movements, unsure and cautious. Now she moves with more confidence, brushing soil from her hands with a practiced snap, labeling dried roots with neat looping letters. She's careful in public, always using the Latin names, always staying just within the bounds of church-sanctioned knowledge. But in the evenings, when it's just the two of you, near the still warm hearth, she asks about the other names. The ones whispered across centuries, motherwort, devil's beat, blood's eye. You tell her sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with reverence. She reminds you of yourself before suspicion turned every kindness into a crime, before healing became heresy. Not everyone in the convent watches with disapproval. A few of the older sisters nod quietly as they pass you in the herb beds. One sister, Magdalene, once took your hand without a word after you soothed her aching knees with a salve. Another left a folded scrap of parchment beneath your bowl at supper with the word "thank you" written in charcoal. Even the abbess seems to tolerate your presence now. She never praises, but she also never scolds. You think she understands more than she says, but not everyone is content. A new priest arrives in late spring, sent from the bishopric for a seasonal retreat. Young, educated, and eager to make his mark. His name is Father Everard. He has smooth hands and sharp words, and he watches the women as though the convent is a room full of broken clocks he's been tasked with repairing. He notices you quickly. Not because you make noise, on the contrary, it's your quiet that unsettles him. He sees Elise trailing after you, listens to her questions about root properties, watches her kneel in the herb garden instead of the chapel. He speaks to you on a Sunday after Vespers, pulls you aside near the cloister archway. His tone is smooth, but his eyes are already judging. He asks about your background, your education, your origins, your affiliations. You answer politely, but briefly. He probes further, quoting scripture about Eve and temptation, about women who stray too far from obedience. You smile mildly and mention the book of Tobit, where a woman banishes demons with the smoke of a fish's heart. He does not smile back. After that, he begins to preach differently. His sermons become sharper, peppered with warnings about false healers and those who cloak pride in the name of piety. He never names you directly. He doesn't have to. Elise avoids his gaze. The other sisters sit stiffly during services. You find yourself walking earlier in the day before sunrise, while the dew still clings to the grass and the convent is quiet. The sky at that hour is soft, the world less rigid. In those moments, you feel untethered from the scrutiny. You gather morning herbs with silent reverence, breathing in the sharp, green perfume of new growth. It's during one of these walks that you discover the small graveyard tucked behind the chapel. Old headstones lean at odd angles, half sunk in the soil, names worn to near nothing by centuries of weather. No one speaks of it. But you begin to visit. You tidy it. Pull weeds. Leave sprigs of sage on the older stones. It becomes your secret chapel, a sanctuary without surveillance. Elise finds you there one evening. You're kneeling, brushing moss from a stone when she appears beside you with a hesitant look. She says, "He's watching me too." You nod. She adds, "He thinks I'm too curious." You place your hand gently on her wrist. Curiosity isn't a sin, you say, but fear of it can become one. That night you write a list, not of herbs or rituals, but of stories, names of women you knew, places, things you remember before the trial, before the convent. You don't know why you do it. Maybe because you're afraid you'll forget them all. Or maybe because you want someone else to remember if you're ever silenced again. You slip the paper into the hem of your mattress, wrapped in oilcloth, just in case. Father Everard's sermons grow more specific. He begins to quote records, trials, confessions. He speaks of temptation taking the form of healing. He talks about corrupted knowledge and the danger of women teaching without authority. Elise becomes nervous. She pulls back during the day, speaks less in the halls. You see her watching herself, measuring each movement as though it might betray her. You worry. Then one evening she doesn't come to the garden. You wait. The sun dips low. The air cools. You find her not in her cell, but in the tiny chapel behind the main sanctuary. She's sitting alone, her shoulders hunched, hands clenched tight in her lap. You sit beside her in silence. Eventually she says, "He asked me to inform on you." Your stomach twists. You ask, "Did you?" She looks at you with wide, frightened eyes. "No. I told him I didn't know anything. I think he believed me. But..." You nod. "But now he's watching you too." She nods back. The wind moves through the chapel like a whisper. You both listen to it. Outside, the herbs continue to grow. The sun continues to rise. And fear continues to bloom in silence. You return to your room that night and pull the paper from beneath your mattress. You read the names again. Then on the back you begin to write more. You write of what you saw in the village, of the girl whose accusations sparked a fire, of the trial, of the pond, of the smell of ash in your hair. You write it plainly without bitterness, like someone recording the weather. You hide the page again, just in case. Because you know now. You've survived one burning, but they never stop building pyres. They just change the kindling. The summer deepens, pressing against the convent walls with heat thick as wool. The stone floors no longer hold a chill, and even the early hours are warm. The garden swells with life, herbs grow tall, and unruly bees hum between blossoms, and the rosemary spreads like wildfire across the edges of its bed. You prune quietly, keeping your hands busy, your eyes low. Elise speaks less now, but she listens more. Her silence has shape, tight, watchful, thoughtful. She walks with care. Even her footsteps seem measured. You see your old self in her just before everything cracked. That small, hidden tension in the chest. The constant awareness of your own shadow. Father Everard begins visiting the garden. Not often, just enough to make his presence known. He never touches the plants. He stands near the rosemary hands, folded eyes, following your movements. He speaks rarely, but when he does, it's always a question. Why do you favor lavender? What does rue treat? Do you believe these things have power? The questions are bait wrapped in civility. You answer without emotion. Lavender calms. Rue eases swelling. They are tools, not magic. He nods as though accepting this, but you know he's counting words, measuring cadence, looking for the tremor that will tell him you're lying. One morning you find your dried bundles disturbed. Not destroyed, just rearranged. Some of the labels have been turned upside down. A few sprigs are missing. The other sisters say nothing, but you see the way they glance toward the chapel, the way their prayers have grown longer. Whispers begin again. Familiar phrases. She knows too much. She's always alone. She taught the girl. It's not loud yet, not like before, but it rustles at the edges of conversation like dry leaves in wind. One night, unable to sleep, you walk the halls barefoot. The stones are warm from the day's sun. You stop at the chapel door, drawn by a faint flicker of candlelight. Inside, Father Everard is praying. Elise is with him. She is kneeling. He is standing over her. You don't interrupt. You retreat before they see you. But you don't sleep that night. The next day, Elise's hands tremble as she pours water into the garden pail. She doesn't speak. You don't ask. By the week's end, she avoids the garden altogether. You send her a folded scrap of linen with a single leaf of yarrow wrapped inside. You tuck it into her chamber door with no note. It disappears by morning. Nothing is said. You begin to watch him. Not just his movements, but his patterns when he walks the garden, how long he lingers near the scriptorium, which sisters he engages, which ones he avoids. You track him like you once tracked signs of fever symptoms first, then cause, and you start writing again. Every night. You record what you saw, what you suspect, his words, his tone, your fears. Not because you think anyone will read it now, but because you've learned that silence is dangerous and memory is fragile. If you're taken again, questioned, confined, these words may be all that's left of truth. You hide your pages in a hollow. You carved behind the garden wall, behind a stone loosened with time. Wrapped in waxed cloth, tied with twine, when not a spell, a record, a warning. One day the abbess calls you to her chamber. She offers you wine, a rare gesture. She pours 2 cups, sits across from you, in the high-backed wooden chair, with the carved saints on its spine. She doesn't smile. She says there are concerns. You say nothing. She continues. The priest believes you are gathering influence, that your knowledge may be taken as something else. You meet her eyes. Is that what you believe? She doesn't answer. She sips her wine. After a long silence, she says, "Do you remember what I told you when you came here?" You nod. You said I was to speak little and be watched. She leans forward. And yet, you've become essential to this house. You don't know whether to thank her or apologize. She finishes her cup, sets it down with deliberate care. Be careful, she says. This place has few enemies but many eyes. You bow your head. Not out of submission, but out of understanding. That night you find Elise in the graveyard, sitting among the leaning stones, arms wrapped around her knees. She doesn't look up. You sit beside her. Eventually she whispers, "He asked me if I saw you working at night." You don't move. She continues, "I told him no, that you rest early, that I barely see you at all." You nod slowly. She says, "It was a lie." You smile faintly. I know. She turns to you, eyes shining. He said the devil's work is hidden in gardens and quiet hands. You reply, the devil's work is rarely that quiet. She laughs just once, and it's the first time in weeks. But it's bitter short. The wind picks up, brushing over the stones over your shoulders, whispering between the trees. You think about the fire again. You don't want to burn. But more than that, you don't want her to. The next morning, you go to the abbess. You request reassignment. You offer to move to the outer hospice where the sick and dying are tended, where the nuns go to spend their last years in solitude. It's not exile, but it's distance, safety. The abbess doesn't ask why. She only nods. 2 days later, you're moved. The hospice is quieter, further from the chapel. The bells sound like whispers here. You tend to the dying. You hold hands slick with sweat, close eyes that have seen too much wipe foreheads with lavender cloth. And every night before sleep, you write one more page. The stories are no longer about you. They're about others. What you've seen. What you fear will happen again. You're not trying to be remembered. You're trying to make sure someone survives. Just one girl. Just one garden. Just one page that isn't burned. The hospice stands at the edge of the convent grounds, like an afterthought, part of the estate, but rarely mentioned, rarely visited. It's older than the main building, its walls rounded with age, the mortar worn soft and pitted by centuries of wind and weather. It smells of tallow candles and old linen, the lingering presence of those who've passed through it. Here, death is no longer feared. It is expected. It is treated with quiet, practiced reverence. Your new room is narrow, the ceiling low. There's a single arched window that looks west toward the tree line beyond the convent wall. Every evening, the sky flames orange, then fades to blue, then bruises purple before disappearing altogether. In those hours, time feels different, less like a series of measured bells, more like breath, rising, falling. You tend to the sick now, not like you once did, not with roots and teas and the rituals of hearth wisdom, but with cloth and prayer and silence. The sisters here are older, slower, gentler. They ask no questions. They do not press. Their faith is the kind that whispers, not one that shouts. You feel safer here, though you know safety is never permanent. Elise writes to you. She doesn't sign her name, doesn't use flourishes or greetings. Just folded scraps tucked into the crease of a worn psalter she knows you read each week. You find them when you turn to the Book of Lamentations, always the same place. She writes, he still preaches, but fewer are listening. Another week, the abbess gave me charge of the garden. I pruned the rosemary. It's thriving. Later I found your notes. Not all of them, only the ones you left in the tool shed. I'm keeping them safe. I've copied them twice. One is hidden in the scriptorium. You burn each letter after reading, but the words stay with you, stitched like embroidery into the fabric of your thoughts. There is still danger, but there is also a future. You begin to feel your age in your bones. The long walks tire you. Kneeling leaves your joints aching, but your mind remains clear, your hands steady. You write every night, pages and pages, stories, testimonies, not just your own, but of others. The midwife turned away by her village, the girl who bled for months before you found her and brewed a tea from crushed nettles, the widow who dreamed of stars and was called unnatural. You write for them all. In the mornings you help wash the dying. The sisters do not ask how you know where to press your fingers to ease the passing. They see that you do. That is enough. One day a traveler arrives, a monk not young, carrying a satchel of letters and a tired smile. He's welcomed, given bread and a place to rest. You meet him at supper, seated across the table, his robes dusty from the road. He watches you quietly, not with suspicion, but curiosity. That evening he finds you in the garden behind the hospice. You are tying bundles of lavender with twine, your fingers moving on their own. He says, "I've heard of you." You pause hands mid-knot. He adds, "They speak of a woman who was burned but did not burn, who was buried but did not die." You shake your head, faintly amused. Stories grow like ivy, fast and wild. He nods, but they climb for a reason. You ask where he comes from. He tells you a monastery near the borderlands where scholars copy texts too old to name, and pilgrims rest when the roads are cruel. He says he's gathering tales, accounts of women like you. He doesn't call them witches. He calls them knowers. You don't ask how he found you. He doesn't say, but he pulls from his satchel a scrap of parchment, your handwriting. One of your first notes. One you thought lost. He says it reached us. Your chest tightens, not from fear, from something stranger, hope. You sit together until the moon rises. He tells you of others, of a healer near the coast who speaks 7 tongues of a woman in the mountains, who shapes charms from river stones of nuns who practice old midwifery in secret and speak of stars as signs, not sins. You listen, you do not speak, but inside something stirs that has been still for a long time. Before he leaves, he hands you a small codex bound in leather pages, hand-cut, marked with symbols older than Latin. He says, "Add to it if you wish." You take it. That night, you do not write your usual letter. Instead, you open the codex. You write a name on the first empty page, Elise. Under it, you write what she has learned, what she knows, what she remembers. Then your own name. Not the one given by the tribunal, not the one recorded in the bishop's ledgers, but the one your mother whispered when she laid rosemary in your crib. You keep the book hidden, not out of fear, but out of care. It is no longer about survival. It is about preservation, about testimony, about truth outlasting flames. Weeks pass. You teach quietly again. The older sisters do not interfere. They see the peace you bring the rest that finds its way into dying hands when you sit beside them. One sister, nearly blind, takes your hand one day and says, "You've never feared death, have you?" You think for a moment, then answer, "Only the kind that comes without reason." She nods. "Then you'll live a long time." The summer begins to fade. The days shorten. Your fingers ache more now. But your mind is filled with words, and your heart holds a small, steady fire, not the kind that burns, but the kind that warms. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. And in gardens across the land, women are still learning the old names, still brewing teas, still healing, still surviving. Autumn drapes itself over the hospice in a shawl of golden leaves and brittle wind. The herbs in the garden begin to wither, their edges tinged with brown. You let them go slowly, harvesting what you can, hanging the last of the chamomile in small bundles from the beams. The scent of drying plants fills your room now, a final breath from summer. You feel the shift in your body, too. Mornings are slower, your steps shorter. The pain in your knees no longer fades by midday. But your hands remain steady, and as long as they do, you write. The codex from the monk grows heavier with ink. You add names not just of women, but of places, hidden wells where prayers are whispered hills, where strange lights are seen crossroads, where healers leave bundles wrapped in cloth and twine. You mark them in code symbols only you and others like you might understand. This is no longer just memory, it is a map. You receive no more letters from Elise, but you hear of her. Once in passing, one of the younger sisters mentions that a girl in the main convent has been placed in charge of copying medical texts. Very clever, she says, though she asks too many questions. You smile. The abbess remembers. She protects in her own quiet way. More travelers arrive with the shortening days. Pilgrims headed south for winter refuge. A wandering tinker with a broken foot you wrap in wool soaked in comfrey. A grieving widow who speaks to no one but cries at night into your shoulder. You hold her until the sobbing fades. These acts, once suspicious, are now just yours. No one here calls them witchcraft. They call them kindness. Father Everard does not come to the hospice. He remains at the main convent, locked in his sermons and his ledgers. You hear he rarely speaks of the woman anymore. Perhaps he has turned his attention elsewhere, or perhaps he fears the silence you've wrapped around yourself like armor. Silence can be sharp too. One day a message arrives. Not a formal letter, but a sealed slip of parchment tied with blue thread, recognizably monastic, but not local. You open it alone. It is short. From the monk who visited. It spreads. A woman in Calais has started a school of herbs. Another in the lowlands carves charms into bread loaves. They speak your name with reverence. Continue. You fold it carefully, wrap it in linen, and tuck it into the codex. That night, you don't sleep. Instead, you walk barefoot across the hospice's cold floors to the small room where the older sisters keep their candles. You light one, and by its flickering glow, you write again, not for Elise, not for the monk, not even for yourself. You write for the girl who never had a choice, the one who pointed a finger because someone else told her to. You imagine her older now, perhaps, with children of her own. You wonder if she fears for them the way women always do. You write a blessing for her, not a curse. You're too tired for curses. The seasons press forward. The days become darker, heavier. Rain falls in slow, steady patterns that lull the hospice into a kind of reverent stillness. You begin teaching two younger nuns in secret. They are clever with their hands and ask thoughtful questions. One carries a leather pouch of dried seeds she found near the cloister wall and asks you if it's safe to plant them. You recognize them at once, valerian likely scattered by the wind or dropped from your own apron long ago. You show her how to place them in shallow soil, how to whisper to them in the early morning just to be sure. You never call it magic. You call it remembering. The older sister who once asked you about death passes quietly one evening. You are the last to sit with her. She holds your hand to her chest and says, "I thought we were here to suffer, but I think we're here to notice." You nod and say nothing. When she is gone, you close her eyes with 2 fingers and lay sprigs of rosemary beneath her folded hands. Not for grief, for memory. The sisters let you say the eulogy. You speak plainly. You say the sister was kind, that she watched things others ignored, that she saw truth where others feared it. Afterward, you find the codex heavier than before. Not from pages added, but from the weight of knowing it may soon outlive you. Your hands still write, but more slowly. Your thoughts arrive in fragments now, like leaves skimming the surface of a stream. You begin repeating old phrases to yourself in the mornings. Touchstone prayers, half-spoken songs. You fear forgetting more than you fear death. So you write instructions, how to dry mint, how to test for fever with the back of a hand, how to know the difference between a dream and a warning, how to sit in silence and still hear the truth. One of the young sisters copies them into a small book of her own. You say nothing, but you watch the care she takes with her letters. You think, this is how it lives on. You walk less now. You sleep more. The fire in your room is kept lit through the night. Some mornings you feel the edge of something pressing close, something vast, like an ocean you've never seen just beyond the door. But it doesn't frighten you. You've lived beyond fear. You've lived through fire. And now your words are seeds. Your silence is shelter. And your story, once nearly extinguished, is being spoken again in other tongues, in other gardens, across other quiet rooms where women watch the world and survive it. The frost comes earlier than expected. One morning you wake to a pale sheen on the garden gate and silver threads across the window pane. You pull your shawl tighter and sit beside the fire watching the flames shift from red to orange to the faintest blue. Your bones feel heavier in the cold, but your hands still move, still remember. You haven't written for several days. Not because there is nothing to say, but because the words arrive more slowly now, like birds reluctant to land. Still, the codex remains close. Each evening you open it and reread the names, some of them yours, some of them borrowed, some of them made up so that the world cannot chase the real ones again. One night as you copy a recipe for wound salve, you pause and stare at the curve of your handwriting. It doesn't look like it once did. It has softened. The loops of the letters hang like tired vines. You trace one with your fingertip and whisper, "Still here." You wonder if Elise still speaks your name, if she walks the garden in early light, breathing in rosemary, listening for the same wind you once followed. You suspect she does. You hope she does. The hospice is quieter now. One of the older nuns passed during the last frost, and another was taken away to a distant abbey for her failing sight. The hallways feel more hollow, the echoes longer. You don't mind the silence. You never have. But lately, the silence is thicker, like fog rather than air. The two younger sisters you've been guiding visit more often now. They don't ask for lessons anymore. They just arrive, sit beside you, and watch your hands. You show them without words. How to test tincture strength by smell. How to steep elderflower until the water runs pale gold. How to wrap dried thyme in linen so it keeps through winter. You don't know if you'll be here when spring returns. You find yourself remembering the pond. Not the trial. The pond itself. The cold water. The way it pulled at your dress, wrapped your limbs in silence. The way the world looked above the surface, blurry and distant as though it didn't quite exist. You remember how peaceful it was just for a moment, and how quickly it ended. The fire was loud, the water was not. You've come to think of that moment under the pond as a kind of threshold, not life, not death, but something between, something sacred. And it's that place you carry with you now. Not the verdict, not the sentence, just the stillness. One evening you wake before dawn, coughing from the smoke of your small hearth. The logs had settled oddly, and one had smoldered sideways, spilling its breath across your cot. You rise and open the window to let in the sharp air. It burns your lungs, but it clears your mind. The stars are bright above. You whisper a name not yours, but someone else's, someone long gone. It feels like prayer. The next morning, one of the sisters finds a letter on your table. It's unsigned, written in a different hand. It reads, "When the fire failed to take you, we thought you were spared, but you were sent instead. For us, I see that now." The sister shows you the letter. You say nothing, but in your mind you see the girl again, the one who pointed, the one who lied. Maybe it was her, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe forgiveness doesn't need a name. Another letter arrives a few days later. This one from the borderlands. Not the monk, but a new name. A woman who calls herself Mira. She writes, "I have built a small gathering space. Women come with jars and questions. We share food, share silence. One of them brought a page, yours, I think. It speaks of rue and rosemary. It speaks of watching. You are remembered." You run your hand over the parchment, feeling the faint indentations of her pen. She is real. Somewhere far from here, there is a garden, and in it stands a woman. She says in your words aloud. Maybe to one, maybe to many. And this is how it happens. Not with drums, not with trumpets, but with hands, with leaves, with paper and pen. You write back. A short letter folded small, tucked inside a sealed pouch to be sent along the next pilgrim's path. You write, "The world does not burn all witches. Some they bury, and from that soil we rise." The younger sisters copy the letter before it is sent. They don't ask your permission. You don't mind. A week later, you find yourself unable to rise from bed. Not from illness, nothing urgent, nothing that panics the others, but from fatigue so deep it hums in your blood. Your breath is steady, your heart still strong, but your limbs feel like they belong to someone else. You rest, you wait, and while you wait, you remember everything. The feel of bark under your palm as you gathered herbs in the forest. The way the fire snapped when you first learned to steep valerian. The quiet gasp of a child taking a first breath in your arms. The press of your mother's fingers, warm and strong, so as she handed you a bundle of sage and said, "Learn this. You'll need it." You remember them all. You do not forget. And now neither will the world. Because even if your body stills, your voice is already rising again elsewhere in pages in gardens, in whispered instructions passed from woman to woman across borders and time. You do not know when your story will end, but you know it will not be erased. You sleep more now. Not the restless dozing of pain or fear, but the soft, untethered sleep of someone who has already crossed most of the bridge. You wake when you're ready and no one hurries you. The hospice bends gently around your slowness meals, brought quietly water left within reach, the fire fed without request. The younger sisters tend the garden without your instruction now. You watch from your window as they bend to the earth, their motions deliberate, confident. They pause sometimes, perhaps thinking of something you once said, or something they felt in their bones, but didn't yet know had a name. One of them, the more serious one with ink always on her cuffs, knocks softly on your door and enters with a parchment. "We've started copying the codex," she says. "We think it should have sisters." You take the parchment from her, blinking at the light filtering through the window. It's your writing replicated in her hand, elegant, exacting, and patient. She's added annotations, small glyphs along the margins. Her own thoughts. her own voice. You smile faintly. Good, you say. It was never meant to be only mine. She stays a moment longer, hesitating in the doorway. Do you want company? She asks, unsure if it's intrusion or kindness. You nod. She pulls up a stool beside your bed and takes out her small sewing work. You sit in companionable silence for a while, the soft sound of thread passing through cloth soothing in its rhythm. Later that day, a pilgrim arrives from the coast. Dusty, thin, weather-beaten, but sharp-eyed and alert. He's brought word from the school in Calais, a gathering that now numbers more than 30. Some are herbalists. Others are women who learned in kitchens and forests and want to reclaim what they were once told to forget. They have begun transcribing more than just the recipes they're writing, stories collecting testimony from others, names, places, dreams. He carries a copy of your codex bound in leather like the original, but with threads dyed red and blue. You run your fingers over its cover, feeling every stitch like a pulse. You hand it back with care. Keep going, you whisper. He bows slightly, not with deference, but with solidarity. Then he leaves as quietly as he came. You sense the end of something nearing. Not with dread, with clarity. The sisters speak more gently around you now. Their footsteps soften. The abbess herself visits once, leaving a vial of pressed rose oil beside your bed. She doesn't speak, just nods and leaves it there, a gesture wrapped in silence. You sleep again. This time you dream vividly. You are walking along the edge of a river. The air is cool and mist coils above the water like breath. You see women there, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Some are familiar, some are long gone, some are still children. They move with purpose, and each one carries something, a basket of herbs, a scroll, a child, a flame. You realize you're one of them, but also a part watching. They don't speak. They don't need to. You walk alongside them until the river curves and disappears into the forest. You stop. They continue. When you wake, your room is lit by the faint glow of dawn. The birds haven't yet begun to sing, and the air is still. You shift your body slowly, feeling every inch of it. Heavy, but still yours. You pick up your pen and write again. It's not a story or a remedy this time, just a line. Let the seeds fall where they may. Some will take. That's enough. You fold the page and place it inside the codex. Later, a novice comes to collect your dishes and finds you sleeping. She tiptoes out, not wanting to wake you. She doesn't notice the page, but one of the younger sisters does. She takes it carefully, copies it into her own journal, and slides the original back between the codex's covers. Your breathing slows. The wind outside shifts. Somewhere in the garden, a cluster of rue blooms for the last time this season. No one planted it there, but it grows all the same. And miles away across the sea, a woman presses your name into damp earth as she plants rosemary beside her door. She does not know your face, but she knows your story. And that is enough. The weather turns sharper, wind biting at the stones of the hospice walls, slipping through cracks no mortar can truly keep out. The sisters begin wearing extra layers beneath their robes, fingers red from morning tasks, breath visible in the corridors. The fires are lit earlier. Meals are heartier. Silence stretches longer. You remain in your room now, rising only when your strength allows. You sit by the window wrapped in blankets, your shawl worn thin, but still faintly scented with sage and smoke. From here, you can just see the edge of the garden, where the last of the dried stalks lean toward the earth, bowing in the wind. The codex lies beside you, always within reach. You do not write as often, but your mind is no less active. Instead, you begin to dictate. The two sisters you trained alternate shifts, one sitting with parchment in her lap, while the other tends to hospice tasks. You speak slowly, carefully. Some days your voice is strong, others barely more than a whisper. But they listen. They always listen. You tell them things not yet written, rituals passed from grandmother to mother to daughter, cures learned through trial and error. Small things, where to place nettle to discourage swelling, how to fold linen to cradle a fevered brow, when to harvest poppy seeds and when to leave them alone. You tell them about fear, about how it moves in shadows, about how it wears robes and smiles and speaks in parables. You tell them not to let fear be louder than truth. They write it all down. Sometimes you see doubt in their faces, not of you, but of the world beyond these walls. You see them wondering how much of this knowledge can survive outside the silence of the hospice. You don't tell them it won't be easy. You just keep speaking. One day you wake to the sound of hushed voices outside your door. You don't catch every word, but you hear fragments, the bishop letter, suspicious writings. Your blood chills. Later, the abbess visits. She enters alone, closes the door behind her, and folds her hands in front of her. You wait. She says, "There are questions." Again. You nod. "Of course there are." She looks toward the window, then back to you. "I will answer them, as I did before." You meet her gaze. "You can still burn me, you know," you say softly. She sighs. "No, they can't. Not now, not with what's begun." You blink, unsure what she means, but she continues. "There are more of you. I've read the letters. I've seen the copies." She steps forward and places a small book on your table. It's not yours, not quite. A translation, a simplified version of your teachings. The handwriting is unfamiliar. They think this is harmless, a curiosity, a collection of customs. You pick it up. It smells of ink and new parchment. The cover is soft, unfinished. The stitching uneven. A beginner's work. But the words are yours. "Elise," you ask. The abbess nods. She's careful, but she's not quiet. She's found a way to speak without shouting. You smile. It comes easily this time. The abbess adds, "Keep teaching, but give them less parchment. Let them learn by doing." You understand. Fewer records, more memory. Fewer words for those who might twist them. More practice for those who'll carry them forward. That night you ask to be taken to the garden. They wrap you in wool and walk you down slowly, one on each side, as the sky bruises with dusk. The air is cold and the earth is hard beneath your slippers, but you stand. You walk the rows, empty now, save for the stubborn stalks of rue and the scattered bones of last season's mint. You touch the earth and feel it sleeping, not dead, waiting. You ask the sisters to bring ash and bone meal. For spring, you say. They obey, even though it is months too early. They trust you. Later, back in your bed, you press a piece of parchment into the codex. It reads only, "We are not weeds. We are wild things rooted deep. You cannot pull us all." You don't sign it. You don't have to. Outside, the wind howls against the stone. Inside, the fire glows quietly. The sisters whisper as they copy new pages, wrapping them in cloth, slipping them into hollow niches in the wall, beneath loose floorboards, between layers of sewn fabric. They're preparing for winter, but they're also preparing for the next world. One where women no longer burn for knowing. The days have shortened to a handful of usable hours now. Dusk arrives before the sisters finish their evening prayers, and darkness thickens around the hospice like ink in water. The wind never seems to stop, constant sighing, sometimes rattling the old shutters like a quiet warning. But inside, your world has slowed to a warm, flickering rhythm. You no longer rise each morning. Your body has grown too tired. Instead, you remain in bed, propped up with pillows wrapped in wool and linen, a shawl tucked up around your shoulders. You feel small but not diminished. The sisters rotate through your room in gentle turns, tending to you, listening, reading to you from your own words when your eyes are too dim to see the page. The codex now has companions, 6 by your last count, each bound differently, some in leather, some in cloth, one with carved wooden covers, each a branch from the same tree grown in its own direction. You once feared your knowledge would die with you. Now you fear only that it will be misunderstood. So you speak whenever you can, not with urgency, but with care. You choose your words like seeds, small, precise, and meant to take root where you'll never see them bloom. You speak of humility, of watching the seasons, of how sometimes healing means waiting, not acting, that sometimes silence is the cure, and sometimes it's the sickness. One of the sisters, the youngest, asks you what to do when someone calls her dangerous. You smile. Ask them why they're afraid. Then listen to what they don't say. She doesn't understand yet, but she will. You've come to see the hospice not as an end, but a nursery, a place where the next generation germinates unseen by the world outside, safe for now. But you know the world will come again. It always does. A new priest visits the convent. Younger than Everard, more careful with his words. You see him once through the window. He speaks with the abbess at the garden's edge. He glances toward the hospice only once. You know that glance, the weight of it. But he doesn't come inside. You think, "Cot, not this time. Not yet." In the quiet, you remember names, faces, even ones you thought you'd lost. You remember the baker who once gave you a honeyed roll on your name day, the midwife who lent you her kettle, the child who gave you a stone shaped like a heart. You remember their kindness, their fear, their silence. You forgive them all. You remember the girl, the mayor's daughter, how you held her hand when she burned with fever, how you whispered to her even when her eyes no longer opened. You wonder what she might have become, what stories she would have told had she lived. Perhaps she too would have grown herbs, or told her own daughter the truth about pain and plants and power. Perhaps. The fire crackles low. You smell rosemary and beeswax. Someone has lit a candle on your table, the wax melting in a tiny pool of gold. You dictate one last letter, not for anyone in particular. You begin, "If you find this, know that I did not die a witch. I lived a woman, and I left the world wiser than I found it." You pause, then continue. "We were not evil. We were inconvenient. And that to some is the same." You fold the page, ask the sister beside you to place it with the codex. She does. Her eyes are wet, but she says nothing. Later that night, you ask to be taken to the garden one final time. It takes effort, your breath short, your body weak. But the sisters lift you gently and wrap you in blankets and place you on a wooden chair. They carry you through the halls, past the flickering candles, through the outer courtyard where frost glimmers on the stones and into the garden. It is winter now. Nothing grows, but the ground is soft beneath the snow. Waiting. You look at the bare branches, the empty beds. You whisper the names of each plant as though they still bloom. You remember them all. You close your eyes and breathe in the cold. And for a moment, you feel her, your mother, just behind you, a warm hand on your shoulder, the scent of old herbs in her apron. You whisper, "Thank you." And then quietly, "I'm ready." The sisters take you back inside. They do not ask what you meant, but they understand. You do not rise the next morning. The sisters find you still and warm beneath the layers of your shawl, your hands folded over a sprig of dried lavender that none of them placed there. The fire has burned low. The candle is a pool of wax. And your breath, so often ragged and shallow, these last weeks is gone like a sigh that slipped gently from the room. There is no panic, no sorrowful wails, just a hush heavy and soft, as if even the stones know something sacred has ended. The abbess is told. She bows her head. She orders the room left untouched for 3 days. The sisters tend to your body with reverence. They wash you in rosemary water. They brush your hair. They dress you in clean linen, knot a cord around your waist, and place a single white feather on your chest. No one knows where the feather came from. One says she saw it caught in your curtain the day before drifting from an unseen bird. Another says it was found inside your shawl, curled near your collar, like it had been sleeping there. No one questions it. They simply place it gently on your chest and press your hands around it. Word spreads beyond the convent. Within days, messages arrive from Calais, from the coast, from small gatherings of women in faraway places where your name has become something spoken with quiet awe. Some send scraps of parchment with copied pages. Others send bundles of dried herbs. One letter reads only, "We are still here. Because of you." The abbess holds a private ceremony. It is not grand, not like the feast days. No incense, no sermon, just a circle of women standing in the garden you once tended. Each places a seed into the soil, thyme, valerian, rue sage. Then they kneel in silence. The grave is dug near the rosemary bush. They do not mark it with a name. They plant lavender instead. No stone, just scent. Because anyone who comes close will know. Not from the ground, but from the air. The codex is wrapped in cloth carried by one of the sisters on a pilgrimage north. She will place it in the hands of another who waits in a village where midwives are still forbidden from speaking during childbirth. From there, it will travel again. And again. It will gather pages. It will change shape. But it will remain yours. Your voice pressed into ink, folded into soil, whispered beside beds of fevered children. Elise, now grown, sends a letter months later. She writes, "I still walk the garden paths you made. I say the names aloud in the morning. I teach without fear. You were right. They could not pull us all." In a village far to the east, a girl reads a page she found tucked into a market ledger. She copies it down, not knowing who wrote it. She carries it with her. She shares it with a friend. And the cycle begins again. They still whisper your name, not in fear, in gratitude, in strength, in remembrance. You are no longer flesh. You are story. You are seed. You are fire that warms, not burns. You are what remains when the wind has finished howling. You are not gone. You are growing. So now, as your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts begin to drift, let the flickering of this long journey settle like soft ash. You've traveled far tonight, from darkened cellars and smoke-choked chapels to sun-drenched gardens and whispered songs among the trees. You've walked beside fear, felt its weight, and watched it slowly dissolve into something gentler. Memory, wisdom, survival. You've seen that even in times of cruelty, there are threads of kindness. That even when voices are silenced, truths can take root. You've learned that knowledge passed quietly from one hand to another can endure where monuments fail. And that sometimes the smallest defiance, a page, a seed, a breath held, can echo longer than any shout. You were there. You lived it. And now you carry it with you. So rest now knowing that the story didn't end in flames. It continued in gardens, in whispered names, in every corner where light finds the soil. Let your breath slow. Let your mind unwind. Let your thoughts grow as quiet as the frost settling gently on old stones. Because even in sleep, even in dreams, you are part of a lineage that no fire could erase, and your place in it is already written.